section on rendering textures. We're inside our section on rendering textures. And what I'm about to do is I'm about to attempt to categorize several different kinds of textures. I think that we can categorize them into a strand, a flake, a bump, and a hole. And so these are surface deviations that are very, very typical. So let's start out with what we might consider a bump, okay? And here's an example that I like. This is a photo reference as I'm looking at, oops. I'm looking at some rivets here, and the rivets, in my opinion, are kind of a bump. And so let's see what would happen if we started trying to render a bump. So basically, the first consideration that we need to make is we want to understand the light direction, okay? And so by understanding the light direction, like on these particular rivets, you can see that the light is coming from this direction. So you've got this, I want to draw it in, I'm going to draw it in profile. So let's say that the shape of the rivet comes up and over and down like this. And let's say that we're seeing a little bit of the top of it, and because we know what they are, their shape is kind of rounded. And one of the things that's going on is they seem to be casting a little bit of a shadow, maybe not as much as I'm giving it. And it looks like the shape of the rivet is probably something like this, and that you can see this indentation, and that's where we're getting this kind of dark surrounding area here, like that. And now we can also imagine if we were looking at them from the top, that we can see here that they're circular, and so if the light is coming from this direction, it's going to be working its way around and falling off the way our light generally will. So we could render over here an area that we would like to say is shadow, and then gradate over towards the light side. Now the top surface of the rivet, because the light is again coming in the same direction, it may have some light fall off where it starts to, it gradually, just very gently darkens from left to right based on where the light is coming from. And there might be a very small cast shadow here. I mean, depending on the light angle, it could be a really long cast shadow. But let's say that there's a nice little cast shadow in here. And if I darken right here a small amount, that will give me the effect right there of reflected light. Okay, so here I've got a highlight, I've got a light, I've got a terminator, I've got a reflected light, I've got a shadow accent, I've got what is probably halftone. Okay, so this is a really basic rendering of a form. However, we're considering it in small. Now, what I wanted to talk about was a sense of a projection from a surface. So let's say that the projection from the surface was less well formed than this rivet. What if it was just a bump? then I think that the exact same principles can be applied. We are not going to have this, because the bump is just like a little raised portion. So what I'm doing first is I'm looking for, where is my separation from light and shadow? How's that going to work here? So I might render core shadow here, something really deep. And then turning out to the light. Computer rendering might make less of a scribbler of me. I've always been such a scribbler, but it's just not working really well with computer rendering. Okay, again, what I'm ending up with is just a little piece of form. In this case, the transitions are a lot softer. Okay, now another piece that I'd like to talk about is I'd like to talk about flakes. And so these guys, whoopsies, these guys are the flakes on a fish. And what we're going to end up with here is we're going to end up with these little kind of, and what I want you to do is I want you to conceptualize them as having a side plane. So in a certain way, they're a little bit like the rivets, except they're not quite as round. But flakes would come up, flakes are an interesting way of thinking about things, because it could be that they came up with leaves or obviously cereal. So let's say the light is coming from the same direction, and so the flakes are going to have a side plane. And not only are they going to have a side plane, but they're also going to cast a shadow. So here comes a small cast shadow. First off, deep inside there is in an area where no light can get to. And then along this line, we've got a shadow accent, and then we've got a cast shadow coming across in this direction. So we've got a shadow accent, and then a small cast shadow coming across in this direction. Side plane. The side plane here is a critical separation between the top plane. So we'll be moving into a kind of a mid-tone in our side plane. And then as we try for our top plane, here we go, top plane, I'm trying to render the top plane. My house just got loud, but I'm just going to keep going here, guys. Okay, so can you see the side plane? Okay. And that's how I would like to think about rendering flakes. Kind of like that. So this will come into play when we start to talk about dragons or anything in that zone. So the next thing that I want to address is strands. And here's a strand. Let's see, I seem to have lost my, like, I didn't mean to do that. I'm going to take it back. Okay, moving on to strands. And here we have like what I'm calling strands, but they could be blades of grass, they could be little bits of hair, they could be branches. So let's see how we're going to deal with that. And the way that I'd like to have you begin to think about it would be very much like a cylinder, and we know how to shade a cylinder. So when we're dealing with, we're gonna pull into a kind of a microscopic sense of what a strand would be like, and so you'll have again a kind of a shadow side. Yeah, it makes me. Here, let me try and render the shadow side for you, and okay, and then this would be the shadow accent, and then it might be that there would be a kind of not just a light side, but if you drew it all down in value like that, then you could even have a highlight on it, which would be really nice. Okay. So that gives us, and then the last thing that I want to talk about would be what does it look like if we have like a hole. And here we have a bullet hole. And so the hole covers a zone where if you imagine it in profile, here's a hole. And if you imagine it in profile like this, and if you have the light coming in that direction, what would happen is you'll have shadow in here, and over in there the light is going to get caught. And this will be useful for later on when we start to talk about rendering translucency. Okay, so now because here this is raised, the bullet hole here is raised on this side, so there will be like a shadow over here. And it's going to be rendered really similar to how we think about to how we thought about the rivet. And I feel like this idea carries through into what will become if we're thinking about cracks in a surface. And that's the way I think of that. And then I just want to just really quickly, oh, not that. What I want to do is I really want to really quickly bring up this guy and see if it makes sense to us. So as we look at the wrinkles, very similar to how we were thinking about, where did I lose it? I lost it there. So I'm going to grab that back. Sorry about that. We'll take this. Okay, and there's that one. Okay, and so now what I want to talk about is I want to talk about the the wrinkles, and the wrinkles have a very similar, they're like a, it's like a kind of extension of this thinking, because if you imagine it in profile, like if you thought to yourself, this would be looking kind of down the length of a wrinkle or something like that, right? We could say that, oh, like I kind of cut it there and cut it here, and this is a kind of wrinkle in someone's forehead, like a little section of skin off of someone's forehead. And if the light was coming from that direction, what would happen is you'll get darkness on this side, and then lightness over on the other side. And so to render this, that's the way I got up to. And if the local value were lower and through here, then that would make it so that there's a highlight right on this edge here, which would really be facing directly into the light source. And so you can see that like there's a little light right in there, and the shadow that's right there. And this one, it's a softer transition into it, but again, a little light right there, a deep shadow here, and a kind of a halftone shadow there. And that's kind of it. Okay, guys, let's see. Thank you so much.